You have to try new things. I mean, as I like to say, the biggest risk is not doing anything differently than we have in the past. So we've started all these open newsroom ideas where we let the public walk right in the newsroom, walk right up to a reporter, tell them their story was great or it stunk or they have a news tip, and that freaks a lot of journalists out, but the best kind of risks are the ones that freak journalists out, because if you don't actually push them out of their comfort zone, you're never going to get anywhere. And so we may do another couple of those open newsrooms, but we, in fact, this morning we put out a press release that we're opening 12 new ones, and we're going to take that concept out on the road to some of our other papers, because if you don't have a relationship with your audience, you're doomed, and we need to have one that's a lot more personal than it's been in the past, and so that's how we view risk as an absolute necessity, not a risk.
Do people just fear for the fact that the data and the stats that can come out of this stuff is going to override the editorial kind of process? And I imagine that's a big thing you have to focus on.
It is a big thing, and I think the best thing about the web is how much information you have about how people use it, and the worst thing about the web is how much information you have about how people use it. It's all about, you can hand that, it's like handing somebody a detonator. Someone who knows how to handle a detonator, it's perfectly harmless. Somebody who doesn't, it can end pretty badly. And I think we try to put a lot of analysis around those numbers. Don't overreact to one story that goes viral because you might have just gotten a link from Drudge or something. It doesn't mean that there's a massive amount of interest in that subject, you just had something go viral. So you have to look at that stuff closely and train the journalist as best you can on how it works. And most journalists to this day still think everybody comes to everybody's homepage. So you have to educate them on pathing and all that.
It's really interesting when you kind of talk about people getting that real-time feedback to what they're writing and how it's being received, and I got to imagine that sets people off a little bit. Is it as hard to try and get them to embrace that as it is just the idea of getting their content out through any vehicle?
The key with journalists is, and this is the mistake a lot of people I think have made in the industry, including places I've worked, is we train them on new technologies before we train them on how it makes their work better. And if you train them on here's how you set up a column in TweetDeck, but you haven't explained to them why Twitter actually will help their journalism, they're not going to be interested.
Yeah.
At some point you got to start with, Twitter makes your journalism better because when you have a story that requires some feedback from the crowd, you can go onto Twitter and say, hey, did anybody see this plane crash that happened? We had this example yesterday in Colorado where a plane crashed in Sterling, Colorado. They were looking for somebody who had seen it, put something up on Facebook and found 5 people who had seen it and somebody got a picture. So, and if you start with that and say, here's an example, now let's go figure out how to set up a column, they're fine.
Yeah.
But you can't start with that. And I think you have to explain, probably for journalists and anybody in any industry, how it's going to make my work better than it was before. Because if you can't answer that question, you might as well just shut the computer down, they're not going to do anything.